Most of these trust fund babies don't have no idea what it's like. Hell yeah, some people are addicted to some substances. Why? Because you're out there. And guess what? You know how stressful, how horrible it is? And so now what you got to do is you have to learn how to cope with it. So yeah, some people may get addicted to some substances, even alcohol. Why? Because they're trying to escape. Because the situation is so dire that what do they have? They have nothing. They have nothing. Now you got the police on their back just when they're trying to get a couple of winks. And here's the thing. Do I want them to be out there on the street? Hell no, I don't want them to be out there on the street. So, I'm going to say it. The United States hates homeless people. This government, no matter which party, it's ruling parasitic troglodytes are monsters who don't care about people and their well-being. And why do I say that? Because there's really been a war against the impoverished and the homeless really since this country began. And it's been ramping up over and over and over again. And as we can see, it is becoming harder and harder to be housed in this country. A shout out to people like Roger Meadows and my sister Savvy Saps for introducing me to the National Low Income Housing the Out of Reach program, or report, I should say, that shows how much it costs to afford a 2-bedroom apartment within the United States, as well as in Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. And it shows that it's becoming even more increasingly difficult just to be able to afford a 2-bedroom or even a 1-bedroom apartment. And so now we're at a point where, and I spoke about this last year, a lot of boomers are becoming homeless. They're struggling because even though they saved up for retirement, that's nowhere near, because of inflation, that's nowhere near what they need in order to be able to continue to live. And forget Social Security. That don't help hardly anything at all. You might be able to get groceries, a little extra groceries with it, but outside of that, maybe you can rent a closet. So there's a war on the poor. There's a war on homelessness. There's war on impoverished people. AKA, this is what we call a class war. This has been going on for centuries in this country. And this class war is taking us all out. I'm trying to be careful with my language because I don't want to get us in trouble on YouTube. Plus, this channel just ain't mine. But it's taking us all out. It's unaliving millions of us. And so I want to get into this really quick because Donald Trump recently signed an executive order. And let's get into this here. Let's see. All right. And then we'll get into the gory detail.
Big and small. The president does set off for Scotland. Federal agencies are looking to tackle the American homelessness problem following President Trump's new executive order. That order meant to push city governments, both big and small, to crack down on homeless encampments and get the unhoused into treatment. But advocates say it could only make the problem worse. Correspondent Alex Capriello is live for us here in Chicago with the details. So, Alex, what is in this executive order?
Yeah, so essentially, Nicole, it's giving cities and states whatever authority necessary to get homeless men, women, and children off city streets and actually into treatment centers to face their problems head on, including addiction. The president is also directing his administration at the federal level to prioritize some of these cities across the country that are already enforcing those bans that might be there for public camping, for drug use, and squatting. Now, as we all know, across America, solving the issue of homelessness has been a central issue for years. There are some 771,000 homeless men, women, and children living on city streets back in 2024, an increase of about 18% from the previous year. And more than a third of that total actually live out there on the street. Some cities have already taken steps to restrict homelessness in America. They're the ones that are marked in red right here on this map and are just a few examples of the place that president says he's going to prioritize. They're cities like Los Angeles, Seattle, and Albuquerque. Those that have not created restrictions, they're marked in blue. That includes Chicago, New York, Philly, and New Orleans. But the battle to get a handle on this crisis is nuanced and widespread all across the country. In Portland, for example, city council meetings have ended in shouting matches as citizens have complained about not feeling safe on their own streets thanks to rampant and widely open drug use and alcoholism. Then say,
Okay, hang on. Let me pause there for a second. Because the whole put them in treatment centers. So are we going to acknowledge now that drug addiction is a medical issue instead of a criminal issue? Are we going to start acknowledging that now? Also, while we're at it, you know what could help alleviate the drug addiction issue? Come here. Housing people. Housing people could help alleviate the need for a drug addiction because many people who become unhoused get addicted to drugs after they become homeless, after they are out there on the streets, because it is stressful as hell out there. Have you ever been homeless before? You see, this is what gripes me. You have this urine-colored comb-over bullshitter that never lived out on the streets, and it's like, I doubt that Donald Trump has ever even laid on grass, and he wants to talk about trying to alleviate homelessness, but you never knew what it likes to even go without. Most of these trust fund babies don't have no idea what it's like. Hell yeah, some people are addicted to some substances. Why? Because you're out there. And guess what? You know how stressful, how horrible it is? And so now what you got to do is you have to learn how to cope with it. So yeah, some people may get addicted to some substances, even alcohol. Why? Because they're trying to escape. Because the situation is so dire that what do they have? They have nothing. They have nothing. And now you got the police on their back just when they're trying to get a couple winks. And here's the thing. Do I want them to be out there on the street? Hell no, I don't want them to be out there on the street. I don't. But the problem is that it's the way people are going about it. You know what ends homelessness? Homes. Homes. I don't know exactly how I can make it any more plainer to y'all. And then here's the problem. This is how capitalism works. It's a very nasty system. Because what it will do, it will say, it will allow homelessness to exist. So that it shows people like you and me who might be either housing insecure or barely housed at all, that You see those people out there in the streets? You see that person pushing that cart with all their stuff? You see that person living in a tent on the curb? You see that? If you don't let me exploit you more and put you deeper into wage slavery, you're going to be just like that person out there on the street. So you're going to accept my exploitation, or you're going to wind up like them. That's how it works. That's the system. And then it also puts into our minds, oh, wait, they're out there on the street. That means they're not working, or they're not working hard enough. Therefore, I must be working hard enough. Therefore, I'm a better human being than they are. My life matters more. Oh, so you had this sense of being better than people, higher than people, that your life matters more, that your sensibilities matter more. Oh, I don't want to see that. I don't want to witness that. Put them someplace where we can't see them. That's how it works. That's how capitalism works. And now you add the further exploitation of them being jailed, them maybe going to prison. And then we have these prisons, some for profit, some owned by the state, where they will put the prisoners to work for either free or nearly free to make products for them or do services, which is slavery. Because as we know, according to the 13th Amendment, slavery has an exception. It's not fully outlawed in the United States. Yes, slavery still exists, just as the inmates at Angola prison in Louisiana, while they're out in the hot sun like today, still picking cotton. That exists today in the year of our Lord, 2025. JB, what's your solution? Give people homes. It's not that simple. Yes, the fuck it is. How many vacant houses do we have in this country? We have more vacant houses than we do have homeless people. And you mean to tell me we can't house them? Or is it that you want to feel better about yourself and you want somebody to look down on? Because if everybody's housed, that means that you're not that special. I'm just saying. Let's continue.
In Denver, a park literally on the grounds of the state capitol building sees regular police activity from loitering, littering, and crime. And then in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, a battle simmers between President Trump and Mayor Muriel Bowser over homeless encampments, including some that are on the White House front steps. At the very same time, a task force has cleaned up more than 500 tons of trash and debris left behind just since last fall. Of course, we know this executive order also follows a separate order from the Supreme Court that says people without homes can be arrested and fined for sleeping outdoors. Nicole.
All right. So, Alex, critics and
Outdoors. Well, I guess camping's out. Huh? I know somebody's sleeping outdoors. I could be just having a picnic. Maybe I fell asleep. And people are like, oh my God, well, there's trash. Well, you guys don't have as many trash cans out in the city like you used to. Like for here in downtown Orlando, how many trash cans are there? There used to be more. Now they've decreased that. Why? Because they don't want the city workers to have to work as many hours, and they don't want to spend as many resources. So guess what? They diminish the amount of trash cans that they have on the street. So there's that. On top of that, they're like, well, we don't want to see drug use. Well, I mean, guess what? If you don't want to see it, don't look. Now that's mean. If you don't want to see it, well, then house them so that you won't have to. But you know, it's funny. The same people that are like, oh, we don't want to see drug use are doing the same, if not different drugs in their own home. It's like, you don't want to see drug use, but you're doing drugs at home. And by the way, caffeine is also a drug, by the way. Whenever you take that sip of coffee or tea, you're doing substances. Whenever somebody's taking a sip of alcohol, they're doing drugs. And yet we don't have a problem when we're at a bar. But let somebody be out on the street with a can of beer that's inside of a paper bag, and then you all got a problem. How many people walking out with them big old, stainless steel cups? They got alcohol in it, but you don't know they do. That clear liquid in that water bottle ain't water. They ain't pleasant for no reason. This is just the biggest amount of bullshit I ever heard before in my life. This is sickening.
Critics and homeless advocates are saying that this may actually do more harm than good, and that it's opposite how our country should be trying to solve this crisis. What's their argument?
Yeah, so essentially what this executive order does, it codifies criminalizing homelessness, giving power to police departments out there to actually arrest and fine people simply for living outdoors and living without a home. And really,
hang on, wait a minute. Let me ask you this. If you find somebody for living outdoors because they can't afford a home, then how is finding them actually helping? That's like me trying to rob somebody that ain't got no money. I'm just practicing. You get the logic? Like, how in the world are you going to find somebody who can't even afford a home? How do you do that? Where's the logic in that? It doesn't, you see, it's not congruent, right? The math ain't mathing. The logic ain't logicking.
it's the second part of that sentence, without a home, is what we should be focusing in on, because advocates say that's the main issue all across America. They say that there is not affordable housing for people in cities. That's what's forcing them to live on the streets. And when you go out there and criminalize homelessness, advocates say, well, then that's essentially going to push them away from the city streets and away from the public eye. They're going to go into hiding into the woods, and that's what's going to cause more harm than good. And that's the reason why they say more affordable housing is needed here.
All right, Alex.
By the way, hang on. You gotta love when people go, oh, we need more affordable housing. My question to you is, what is affordable? Because to a billionaire, a Bugatti is affordable. To somebody that makes $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, $1 million home, that's affordable. To somebody who's making well over $100,000 a year, they're making $100,000 a year, they can afford a $2,000 a month, apartment. They can afford that rent. But when you're making minimum wage and everything is way above what you can pay, then what is that? And they're like, and they always, when it's affordable, they always make it just to the point where you can barely make it. And then they'll go, well, we have programs like Section 8 and different housing vouchers, but the lists are years long. The shortest length of time I've heard for a list is 5 years long. Some places are longer than that. So what do they do in the meantime when they're waiting on the list? What do they do? And then a lot of people, I'm gonna be real. Some people come from households where their parents can co-sign, or they can live with their family, or they can borrow money from their family. Most of us ain't got that. We ain't got it. And then we come from a family that does not have money like that at all. And so then what we do? What do we do? When we talk about the housing that we need to have, and then it's like, okay, affordable, but who sets that affordability? Is it us that sets the affordability? No. Because guess what? When it comes to affordable housing, it's the real estate brokers, it's the real estate agents, it's the real estate empire in this country that sets those prices. And they still want to make money. Because you got to remember, some of these real estate companies, they also have a responsibility to their shareholders. And for the CEOs and the CFOs and COOs, they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, meaning that they still have to make a profit. Right? So the prices are always going to be up there. But let somebody like me say, oh, well, we should have housing that's built and owned by either the municipality or the state. Then people want to get mad. You want the state to do something? You want the state to own it? If it means housing more people, then sure. They'll be competing. Well, then I guess they're gonna have to step their game up or step their game down as far as prices go, because it's too damn expensive. Well, they have to make their money somehow. All right, well, maybe they can get a job, because being a landlord ain't no job. But it gets a little worse than that. It's worse because I can see this not just affecting people who are homeless. I can see this affecting all of us in some dire way. Let me share this as well. So this says what to know about civil commitment, Trump's new policy for homelessness. Some of y'all may have heard about this, but let's get into it. President Trump's new executive order to combat homelessness encourages local governments to revive civil commitment, a process to place people with mental health issues in treatment facilities without their consent. Let me ask you this. What mental illnesses would qualify to be placed in an institution without your consent? How many people have said, oh, well, if you're trans, you have a mental problem? So now we're going to start putting people who are trans in a mental institution? Where's the line? Then it's going to be, well, if you're gay, you have a mental problem. I guess I'm getting locked up in a mental institution. Did you know that mental illness, depression is also listed as a mental illness? It didn't say whether it's temporary mental illness or a permanent mental illness. They just said mental illness. So if you're depressed, I guess you're going in. You know what they used to call a mental illness back then? Especially during the times of slavery? It was called drapetomania. Yes, there was a condition called drapetomania. And you know what that was? That was the condition of Black enslaved people who had this predisposition or this drive to free themselves. That was considered a mental illness back then, called drapetomania. Go ahead, Google it. Go ahead. And so now they're saying, well, we got to institutionalize these people. What about people who are neurodivergent, who may be somewhere on the spectrum? What about them? And you can bet my goodness, you can bet your bottom dollar that anybody who comes from a wealthy family that has any type of what they consider mental illness or special needs, they're not going to be put inside of an institution. They're not. Because they just so happen to be born in the right family. Lucky them. What about people who may have bipolar disorder? What about people who may have Down syndrome? Would it be just limited to just mental disabilities? What about physical disabilities? What about somebody with cerebral palsy? What about somebody who's on kidney dialysis, like I was? What about somebody who has multiple sclerosis? See, you see where I'm going with this? This is dangerous because it won't be just limited to people who are unhoused. It could expand even further. And this is why it is problematic. Let's continue on. Why it matters: involuntary civil commitment has historically been used as a preventative method to confine people before they harm themselves or others, and most frequently affects vulnerable groups such as LGBTQ+, people of color, and people with disabilities, according to several studies. Context: it says the order Trump signed Thursday calls for shifting homeless individuals into long-term institutions for humane treatment, which the administration says it will restore public order. Here's another question. What is considered humane treatment by their standards? Because according to our government, back in the early 2000s, our government did what was called enhanced interrogation techniques, aka torture. But they didn't want to call it torture, and they didn't consider it torture because, we were just trying to fight the terrorists. But no, they were torturing people, which is a war crime. So by what humane conditions are they implementing in this? Especially holding people without their consent, especially if a crime has not been committed. Ruling class, I tell you. Says the order directs officials to determine if federal resources can be used to ensure that those with serious mental illness are not released back into the public solely because government facilities lack enough beds to hold them. The order also requires the Justice Department to evaluate homeless people arrested for federal crimes to determine if they are sexually dangerous persons. That could also include people who are LGBTQ who have never done anything that is non-consensual with adults. I'm sorry, that was consensual with adults. Like, if you're unhoused, but you did something with another consenting adult, but you're of the same sex, well, guess what? They could deem that as, well, that's a mental problem. You're sexually dangerous because we don't agree with you being gay. By the way, LGBTQ youth are overrepresented in homelessness. Yep. It says the other side. Critics say that the order won't help people afford homes, and previous attempts at mass institutionalization frequently violated the 14th Amendment due process rights. It says these executive orders ignore decades of evidence-based housing and support services in practice. So that's from the National Coalition of the Homeless, Donald Whitehead Jr. It says he added the orders represent a punitive approach that has consistently failed to resolve homelessness and instead exacerbates the challenges faced by vulnerable individuals. So it says before the 1960s, people with mental health issues were often thrown into jails for vagrancy alongside criminals, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. So vagrancy is a very interesting word, and a lot of us who are Black know this word. Let's share the definition of vagrancy, shall we? Because I think a lot of us Black people, especially who have studied Black history, we know what vagrancy is. But I want, just for the sake of everybody knowing, because when you know better, you do better. Let's take a look at the definition of vagrancy, shall we? Let's take a look here. It says vagrancy is the state of living as a vagrant, homeless, right? But vagrancy used to be purposeful unemployment. Or they would think that if you weren't at work, if you were just chilling out on the street as a Black freed person, then guess what? They say that you are being vagrant. You are committing vagrancy, and it would place our people in jail. And just because they're not employed. Imagine being put into jail or prison because you're not employed. What does that sound like? All right, so let's continue. It says the standards that states had to follow to commit someone had little legal oversight. So since then, there has been a push to orient facilities towards mental health treatment rather than incarceration. More than 500,000 people were committed to mental health treatment facilities in the 1950s, according to a 2010 study. That number fell to 30,000 by the 1990s with a shift in focus on treatment. The Supreme Court has also stepped in to define the boundaries of civil commitment. In a case out of Florida in 1975, the court ruled that an individual must pose a danger to themselves or others to be held against their will. The court ruled in a separate case in 1979 that a clear and convincing standard of proof is necessary for involuntary civil commitment. So the American Psychiatric Association classified homosexuality as a mental disorder until 1973. Making it easy for states to send LGBTQ people to institutions because of their sexuality. Having a mental abnormality is typically required for admission to a facility, according to the Prison Policy Initiative, which researches the effects of mass incarceration. The group argues that having a definition that broad would imply to all people who are civilly committed are disabled, which made it hard to accurately determine the number of disabled people in the population studied. Patients of color, basically black and brown, are more likely than white patients to be committed to involuntary psychiatric hospitalization, according to a 2022 report from the American Psychiatric Association. Black patients and those who identify as multiracial were still more vulnerable even after factoring confounding variables. So therefore, this is one of the problems, because it is a slippery slope. Instead of actually just housing people and making sure that they got the housing first and then everything else follows, they're focused on, well, you need to have housing on your own. And therefore, if not, because of the conditions being so dire, well, we're going to institutionalize you. Let me share something with y'all. Let me. Okay. Okay. It says Trump issues executive order expanding bipartisan war on people without homes. So, of course, there's over 770,000 people. By the way, the homelessness rates have been increasing well over 20% over the last 3 to 5 years. So therefore, the homelessness is actually exploding. It says endemic vagrancy, disorderly behavior, sudden confrontations, and violent attacks have made our cities unsafe. There's nearly 2/3 of homeless individuals report having regularly used hard drugs like methamphetamines, cocaine, or opioids. The federal government and the states have spent tens of billions of dollars on failed programs that address homelessness, leaving other citizens vulnerable to public safety threats. Well, I mean, one of the best treatment programs you can have is actually just giving people permanent housing, but they never wanted to actually try that. Executive order matches language Trump used on a campaign trail. It says, once our great cities have become unlivable, unsanitary nightmares, surrender to the homeless. It says in the video, speeches around the country, Trump promised to end homelessness by creating tent cities where the homeless can be relocated. So, I want to talk about housing first, because this would be the better, that would be the better choice. Let's start here. It says, underscoring that the order has nothing to do with ending homelessness, but rather expanding the police state. The order also directs Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Scott Turner to end funding for housing first policies and instead promote accountability programs. So what actually would work, they don't want to do. Because to them, that's just a handout. You know what? I'm gonna keep it a buck with you. For all the surplus value that these billionaires and 100 millionaires have stolen from the workers, from all of the exploitation that these trust fund babies and their trust fund parents and the robber barons have taken from us, you know what? I'm gonna say it right out loud. You know what? I don't care if they get a handout. Go ahead, give it to them. In fact, they deserve it. because we've been giving handouts to the wealthy for decades and decades. Therefore, let's flip it. I'm sick and tired of giving handouts to people who already have yachts. I'm sick and tired of giving handouts to people who have mansions. I'm sick and tired of giving handouts to people who are only going to just take that money and squirrel it away in their offshore bank accounts, so then they can actually just hand it to their kids so that they could be a bunch of snot-nosed little punks who don't give any regard for human life, and then they want to rule the world. No. No, absolutely not. If that means that some people out on the street get a little bit of housing, they maybe get some food stamps, they may be able to get some free healthcare, some treatment. You know what? They're human beings. Why not? They're human beings. They're human beings. If you are like, oh, well, people aren't accountable. The billionaires aren't accountable. You think Peter Thiel is accountable? You think Harlan Crow is accountable? You think Elon Musk is practicing accountability? Mark Zuckerberg? Bill Gates? The leeches of this country, some of them were at Trump's inauguration. Some of them were at the DNC convention. And you guys want to talk about accountability, but you won't even hold anybody else accountable. You guys want to talk about accountability? Release the Epstein list. Oh, but that's a bridge too far. Y'all want to talk about accountability? Hey, practice what you preach. Yo, talking about being unhoused, that gets me fired up, bro. It does. Since housing first policies began with the fact that shelter is a basic human need and should be available to everyone regardless of job status, mental health, or addiction. By ending support of these types of programs, the Trump administration is shifting government support only to programs that require that recipients already be employed or submit to and complete treatment programs before being granted access to housing. And how well has that worked out for us? Right? Maybe instead of trying to push homeless people to jump through these hoops where it's damn near impossible, it's like, and then people will point to, oh, well, that person do it, oh, I did it, blah, blah, blah. They're the exceptions, not the rule. Can you get an ID without an address? Answer. Come on. Answer. Can you get an ID without an address? No, you can't. You can't get an ID without an address. Can you get a job without an ID? No, you can't get a job without an ID. Can you get your social security card? Well, first you have to contact the vital statistics office in where you were born. Some people, they may not even know, or they may not remember. Or they may have been part of an adoption program. You never know. And then they also have to have, in order to be able to get that social security card, that has to be sent to a particular location. If they don't have an address, then they can't get sent the social security card that they applied for. Also, it costs money to get that social security card from the vital statistics office. Do they have money? No. Why? Because they're homeless. And how do they get money? By working. But how can they work if they don't have an ID? How can they get an ID if they don't have an address? Well, how can they get an address if they don't have housing? Well, then they just need to find a job. But they don't have an ID. There are programs out there. Yeah, and you know what a lot of those programs do? They also make you jump through hoops in order to be able to just have a cot to sleep on. Some of those programs will force you, well, if you want to stay with us, well, you're going to have to pray to our God. You have to go to our Bible study, and you're going to have to worship the way we do. And then on top of that, there's also other things on top of it. Because they may treat you like trash. Also, you have to worry about people stealing your stuff. You also have to worry about sexual assault that sometimes happens. I've actually spoken to people where they're unhoused, and if they got something from somebody, let's say I had an extra bag of Doritos and I gave it to somebody that's unhoused. If that unhoused person goes to that shelter and opens up that bag of Doritos, guess what? The rule in that homeless shelter is if you open it, you got to share it with everybody in there. Which means that they're not going to be able to have that bag of Doritos. Or that apple. Or that takeout rice that somebody bought them. Or that sandwich. There's so many different variables. Or some homeless people may even have a pet. Believe it or not, some of them do. But they go to a shelter, they can't take their pet with them. And so all these different things, man, that like people don't take into consideration. And so a lot of these things could be alleviated if you implement a housing first policy, but they don't want to do it because ultimately they want it to be like, oh, well, you have to jump through hoops. Let me say something too. All these people that are talking about, oh, well, we want you to have to jump through hoops in order to be able to get housing. Most of the people who are saying that have probably never been unhoused, and they've never had to jump through hoops to get the things that they've gotten. You had a home where you could put your address on so you can get your ID. You had a home where you actually had food. You had a home. And then some of the people were like, well, no, I was homeless. And I'm like, yeah, how hard was it for you? Was it hard? Yeah. Why would you want other people to have to go through that? And most of the time, I'm going to be real with you. And some people are not going to get mad at me for saying this because, oh, that's identity politics. Fuck it. I don't care. Some people who say that a lot of times are men that will say that. They'll be like, oh, well, I did this and I got out of it. It was, I was able to get out of it. But at the same time, it's like, okay, but for women, it's a little bit more dangerous because the risk for sexual assault is actually higher. So going to a shelter may be more disadvantaged for them. But it's also a disadvantage if you're out there on the street because people can do stuff to you too. Here's another little tidbit of information. Some people who are addicted to substances while they're homeless, they're addicted to those substances because guess what? It keeps them awake so they don't fall asleep, because once you fall asleep, that's when you're most vulnerable. Right? Some of these substances are uppers, so they keep you up. They keep you awake. They keep you alert. Yeah. Being homeless is hard. And most people who have really experienced homelessness wouldn't wish it upon anybody else. Not just that, but also you got to think about the mental aspect of it, how people do not see you. You are now automatically invisible. You are invisible to people. Therefore, you are cut off from society, even though you are within arm's reach of other human beings. And some of y'all have never experienced that. Some of y'all have never experienced that, probably will never experience that. But you lack the sympathy and empathy to be able to look at other people and see other people as you see yourself in other people. And this is part of one of the reasons why this system is so horrible, because it deprives you of your humanity. It deprives you. It talks you out of your empathy for your fellow human being. So therefore, you're less humane to people who are down and out. And that's a part of individualism. Because you lock your humanity away for the sake of self-preservation. But in doing so, you lose yourself. You lose your humanity. Says many states, including those run by Democrats, have already embraced Trump's crackdown against the unhoused. In July 2024, California Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom signed an executive order targeting homeless encampments, ordering state agencies to remove them from public areas. Newsom followed that up with an even more draconian order this past May, directing cities to adopt anti-camping ordinances that mandate unhoused individuals to relocate every 72 hours. So here's the thing. Trump is not the only one doing this. The GOP and MAGA are not the only ones that are doing this. It's also Democrats. This is why we talk about being post-duopoly. This is why we talk about leaving both parties, because they do the same things, except for one does it with a scowl and the other one does it with the concerned, trolling face. Oh, we just got to end this homelessness. Those poor homeless people, but we just can't see them. I can't bear the sight of these homeless people. You guys have to move every 72 hours. It's just too much. I can't. I just don't want to be begged for money while I'm eating my brunch. What am I going to do? My ecoy salad. I got to dig in my pockets and give you some change. I don't carry pocket change. You don't want to see homeless people anymore? All right, give them housing. This is why we do mutual aid. This is why. Look, homelessness is going to get worse. And I'm going to tell you why it's going to get worse. Let me share this. A lot of you have probably already seen this before, but let's go over it again. National Low Income Housing Coalition, their Out of Reach program. How much do you need to earn to afford a modest apartment in your state? Right? Hourly wage required to afford a 2-bedroom rental home by state. Let's take a look. Let's look at my state, Florida. Florida is the 9th most expensive state in the United States. Last year it was the 10th. It moved up. It got more expensive. Back before this, it used to be just shy of $35 an hour in order to be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. Now you have to make $37.27 an hour in order to be able to afford a 2-bedroom rental apartment in the state of Florida. And you know why I put this here? Because people are going to go, well, if you just move to a red state, then that will be cheaper for you. If you move to a red state, then it's not going to be as expensive because those blue cities are seriously expensive. This is a red state. How expensive is that? So there is no, Republican cities, Democrat cities, Republican states, Democrat states. No, baby. It is horrible everywhere. Because you got to remember, both parties actually work for the billionaires. They work for the oligarchs. They work for the parasite class. They don't work for us. If they did, then we would have a housing first policy already. We would have a central planning model that actually focuses on people first and profits second. But they don't focus on that. Look here, South Carolina. It's 32nd in the entire country. You have to make $25.91 an hour. Texas is number 22nd, $29.64 an hour. Arizona is the 13th most expensive state, $34.18 an hour you have to make in order to be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. Let's look at Kansas. 43rd, you have to make $20.87 an hour. You have to work 115 hours a week just to be able to afford that. Illinois, you have to make $29.81 an hour. Right? Let's go to Oregon, $33.02 an hour. New York, you have to make $46.03 an hour. DC, you have to make $44.50 an hour to afford a two-bedroom apartment in Washington, D.C. The cheapest place to live is actually Puerto Rico. We have to make $11.64 an hour, but you still have to work overtime. You still got to work overtime. And of course, Hawaii is the second most expensive state with $49.19 an hour. So with that being said, it's easier to become homeless now. It is harder to maintain housing. Meanwhile, the federal minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour. In a lot of states like Pennsylvania, their minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour. So it would be more beneficial for us to have a housing first policy instead of going with a policy of personal responsibility. Because it's funny how everybody wants to talk about personal responsibility, but nobody wants to talk about community responsibility. See, this is what happens when you separate the individual from the collective. That is the problem with individualism. Humans are by nature a communal species. Therefore, we depend on one another in order to be able to survive. Capitalism severs that tie. It severs it. Therefore, if you're on your own, then guess what? You can't really survive. Meaning, we're killing ourselves as a species. That's what we're doing. That's what we're literally doing right now. So, look, this is why we talk about mutual aid. Doing mutual aid, building dual power, and helping out the most vulnerable in our communities. This is why I was not live last week, because I was at a mutual aid event and we were giving out school supplies for kids. I was volunteering and, you know, there was REAL, Revolutionary Education Action League, that was there, as well as PSL was out there. My comrade and homie, Katie Lewis, as well as Sabiha, they were out there. So we have somebody also from the Florida Palestine Network that was there, as well as the Freedom Feeders Collective that was out there, that was helping to serve the people. And this is why we do it, because we know that the governments will not do nearly as much as we could. And if we had those government resources, homelessness wouldn't even exist. But this is why we're working towards establishing an actual government that actually does. This is what is called building dual power, meaning that we build a government up while this one's still in place. Because ultimately, this government is not doing a damn thing for us. So we got to build our own. That's why mutual aid is so important. This is what the Black Panther Party did. And that's how we're going to liberate ourselves. That's how we're going to do it. Because you cannot depend on this system any longer. This system was never built for us. The system isn't broken. It was designed this way. It was evil from the start. This is an evil, wicked system. And it deserves to be in the dustbin of history.